Hey everyone, this is Tim at Broken Dice, bringing you another video in my series on the indirect approach. Kind of a personal passion project for me. I just really enjoy the topic, and I'm beginning to see a pattern here. For anyone that's seen the first two videos in this series, I think we're narrowing this stuff down fairly quickly. First off, we're going to be looking at Germany's invasion of France in 1940 in this video. My guiding efforts in this is B.H. Liddell Hart's book on strategy, where I first learned about this idea of the indirect approach. And then as a guide, I'm going to be using Osprey's France 1940 because it condenses an awful lot of information into a very small outline book, and I just enjoy their series on campaigns and stuff because they're just always so full of information and stuff. And for, excuse me, and for us war gamers and stuff, they're just fantastic, especially early on, because in the back of the book, they used to give wargaming suggestions way back in the day, and that's why I like some of these early books. In the future, we're going to be looking a little bit more at talking about Clausewitz and the differences between Hart and himself in some of these series. But yeah, it's going to be exploratory in a lot of different ways. So let's at first, let's not get distracted here. Let's talk about the criteria for my indirect approach. Again, as a review, it has to have three distinct features. You have to move from an inferior position to a superior position. You have to create dislocations by creating movement in the enemy force from a preferred strategical or tactical position to a lesser option. In other words, if they're behind like an example, they're a defended position and stuff, and your movement creates them a situation which they have to abandon that well-prepared position, and it creates that dislocation and movement where they have to move around to a different position, then you've achieved what's referred to as dislocation. Economy of force. Now this one, you need to compare it. I've been thinking about this. You need to compare it to the original. Like if you were facing that, look, an example of a defended position, and you are going to assault that position, your losses are going to be significantly higher than if you use this indirect approach. That is the idea of economy approaches. You don't get to do it for free, but you're trying to minimize your losses in personnel, equipment, psychology, everything. Because if you just make a move and then you turn around and you're faced with another direct approach to the problem, then you really haven't achieved much, especially if your losses are significant. So economy of force is really paramount and very hard to achieve, actually. Okay, Germany's plan in this. I mean, we've all read this and from being in school and stuff, and just in our hobbies and stuff, we know this. They avoided a direct assault on the Maginot Line. They attacked through the Low Countries to engage the Allied armies, and once those Allied armies had moved forward to engage that attack at the stop line, then they committed a large-scale attack from the Ardennes. Here's a picture. Now, most of these maps and everything, I've gotten them off the internet. They're not mine, so don't mistake me, my artistic skills for this, because they are not mine. It's a great map, though. It shows that breakthrough, that large-scale attack through the Ardennes, and how it split the forces up. We'll talk about why this didn't work for the Allies here in a moment. Okay, here's another picture showing that through the Ardennes, that Dinant, that little town of Dinant, Dinant. If you look back through history and that Givet, Givet, there have been so many battles fought through there. This is it shouldn't have been that much of a surprise historically. I mean, I know it's a harsh area to move troops through, but it has been done many times in the past. Um, Allied battle plan. Move to the stop line in the Low Countries. That was like along the Dial, the River Dial in Belgium. Um, Stop and hold that German offensive in place, and then prepare for a counterattack. Because they, at this point in time, we have to understand that the Allies, they were not really prepared for a ground war of any variety, really. They too much of their preparations, obviously, for the French were set on defense, and so they were really resting upon that Maginot Line, and then that sort of really what they wanted to do was funnel that any sort of German offensive in a narrow area, knowing that they weren't going to assault directly against the Maginot Line and then therefore be able to stop it. Well, the problem was that they moved so far that they created a weak point at the Ardennes. It became like a hinge. It was the fulcrum for the German attack, and it just unhinged everything because they moved too far away and were not able to counterattack with any significant force, and therefore we created the dislocation. They even assisted in the Germans creating that dislocation of their forces. Okay, here we see this is a picture from the book Osprey book, France 1940. You can see them moving up, and I don't know. It seems like the further they move to meet this assault, the greater the weakened gap became between the Maginot Line and their advancing forces, and that you kind of like, you're stretching that rubber band pretty thin, and it doesn't take much to punch right through it. So yeah, and you can look here. This represents the Ardennes and how they just the Allied forces move forward, and they almost it's like they gave up this opportunity. It almost was presented itself. Okay, here we see towards the end again. I can't exaggerate this enough that the German forces were able to, through movement, move from an inferior position to a superior one, i.e., not attacking the Maginot Line, moving from a position that was deemed impractical. So they had the element of surprise, they had the element of timing, they had everything working for them. And the Allies, because of how far they moved, I really believe that was one of the weaknesses, that they felt like they could move up and hold the German forces there in place. But what they didn't account for is the Germans knowing that's what they were going to do and devising a plan to defeat that. It's almost like they were a little bit blind to it, and really they thought they were going to fight a similar type of war as World War One. But I don't think it was going to. I don't think they had in their mind trench warfare. But I thought they thought that it was going to be a battle of like, we'll move up, we'll fight, we'll trade a little ground for time, and then be able to counterstrike. But it just never had. The German forces moved way too fast from an unexpected position, and they were able to achieve this victory with economy of force. Uh, it was devastatingly effective. Devastatingly effective. So let's take a look at my ideas why the Allies failed in this. They failed to recognize the changing conditions of a new battlefield, for one thing. This has been written about many times. I'm reinventing the wheel on this one. They were not real trained in the idea of mobile warfare, combined arms, and command and control. They lacked all three of these. They they either did like some sort of small scale spoiling attacks, and then they would launch their bombers and stuff unsupported, and just their their use of combined arms was lacking tremendously. Command and control. They didn't operate in unison together very well, especially after the breakthrough. Everything became so disjointed. It almost like units were on their own. The French had too many different levels of quality of units, and the command and control over them was lacking at best. Two, I think they had a political unwillingness to recognize the threat posed by Germany early on. It's like they didn't recognize the fact that after World War I, Germany was seething with anger over the way it was treated after the war. And to live in that blind denial really placed them on the back foot. They were always responding to Germany's aggression, whether it was in the Baltic or in Poland. They were kind of always responding. They were never dictating. They were always, because they just had this hesitation. They just did not want this to happen, and that was reflected in the populations. They still had that trauma and loss of the previous war fixed in their mind. The losses were so large. That wound was still fairly fresh for many people in France. Was Germany successful in the direct approach? We don't have to go into this too deeply, but yes. One, their initial assault into the Low Countries, into Holland and Belgium, caused the movement. Their attack through the Ardennes was the epitome of the indirect approach, which created the dislocation of the Allied forces. And the Germans were able to achieve all this with relatively few losses. Now, it did strain their military to the breaking point, I think, to be moving that far that fast, but it worked. They had the right training, the right equipment, the right machinery for the job, and that's what led to their victory. So yes, again, we see that this indirect approach, done successfully, done at the right time, results in victory. It's interesting to me that how this plays out, and so now we've gone through 3 different of these campaign books, 3 different scenarios. We've done Normandy, Austerlitz, and now France. And in all 3, that indirect approach leads to victory. And that's all there is to say about that. I mean, we're finding some sort of formula here. But how long will this formula be useful in a modern age? I don't know. So that brings us to our conclusion, and obviously the Germans were more than capable of executing the indirect approach. They were able to move from an inferior position to a superior one. They dislocated the Allied forces with their move through the Ardennes, and the speed of the movement constantly kept the Allies off balance, and they were able to achieve their victory with economy of force. So yes, the German invasion of France in 1940 met all the criteria of the indirect approach. So I hope you like this thing. This brings us to the end of this video. Leave a comment down below if you think I've missed something in this. But like I said, I'm just looking at this indirect approach, and I'm looking at it kind of like with little blinders on this. I don't want to get outside of my criteria here. But so far in the first 3 books, the indirect approach has proven itself a winner. So everybody stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you next time.